If some of us ignore its harmful effects on health, many specialists warn against the harmful effects of sugar, especially for children. In a video published by the OBS in 2018, dietitian and nutritionist Magali Walkowicz even compares it to alcohol for children. We take a look back at these shocking remarks that lead us to think about the composition of our plates. While moderate sugar consumption is acceptable, its origin should be thought-provoking. And for good reason. Processed and ultra-processed products are already very rich. Industrial cookies, pastries, candies, children and even adults readily opt for these delicacies which are good for morale. But what about their impact on health? Excessive sugar consumption, what are the risks? For Magali Walkowicz, author of the book Petit Déj et Snacks Low in Sugars, Recipes from a Dietitian to Free Your Children from Sugar, parents must be attentive to children's eating habits. And for good reason. The specialist who warns against the composition of industrial cakes estimates that the youngest can consume up to 300 grams of sugar per day, or the equivalent of 60 lumps of sugar. An ingredient whose health risks are often highlighted. Thus, she highlights 6 problems from which they may suffer in an episode of Behind the Label, an appointment proposed by the OBS during which specialists sift through everyday consumer products. Among the disorders singled out: cavities, reactive hypoglycemia, hyperactivity, weight gain, type 2 diabetes or even pre-cirrhosis. This last condition would affect 3 to 11% of children, according to Magali Walkowicz, who reveals that it is a disease affecting mainly alcoholic adults. Sugar, children's alcohol? In a way, sugar is children's alcohol, summarizes the dietitian who points out its effect on the liver. An opinion shared by Robert Lustig, pediatric endocrinologist at the University of California at San Francisco, who explained in a 2017 article in The Guardian that the latter considerably affects the emunctory organ and the brain of children when it is consumed excessively and chronically. During the Paris-NASH symposium which took place at the Institut Pasteur in 2016, relayed by an article from RTBF, 250 French and American hepatologists met and sounded the alarm because they saw appearing in children, exponentially exposed to sugars and obesity from pre-cirrhosis of the liver with cell damage. The specialists had called for reversing this trend quickly, especially since it seemed to progress in parallel with the increase in diabetes, overweight and obesity in the world, 3 factors considered at risk in the development of precocious steatosis, in addition to an identified genetic factor. Between twins or in parents of children with obesity. Professor Lawrence Serfati, organizer of the Congress and hepatologist at St. Antoine Hospital, had thus called for strengthening information and prevention of the risks of metabolic steatosis among children and their parents. Are children eating too much sugar? According to a report from the National Agency for Food, Environmental and Occupational Health Safety, ANSES, published on June 25, 2019, children absorb too much sugar. Excessive consumption can increase the risks to their health. Biscuits, candies, cakes, sodas, syrup. These contributions are considered worrying by the agency, which explains that childhood and adolescence are crucial periods for acquiring good or bad eating habits. The latter can be preserved in adulthood and at the same time promote diabetes and obesity. Thus, it would be 75% of 4 to 7-year-olds, 60% of 8 to 12-year-olds and 25% of 13 to 17-year-olds, who consume excess sugar. Irene Margaritas, professor and head of the Nutrition Risk Assessment Unit at ANSES, also warns of certain too sweet products taken outside the baby section, which would be administered to children even before their 4th birthday. At the same time, she advises against using sweets as a reward. The agency also calls to avoid snacks based on foods that are too rich, considering that this step is not essential in addition to the 3 daily meals. It would therefore only be recommended in case of hunger, by limiting pastries, cakes, sugary drinks, cookies and fruit juices. She also notes that these do not replace the portion of fruit recommended, and it is, at most, 1 glass per day and not every day, says Professor Margaritas. Favor homemade. If these observations may seem somewhat alarmist, rest assured, there is no question of completely ending the consumption of sugar in children or of instituting drastic measures. On the other hand, it can be beneficial to show moderation and choose the best products for the youngest, since these are the notions that are instilled in them at this age that they risk perpetuating as adults. In this sense, Magali Walkowicz recommends limiting industrial products and favoring meals and snacks prepared at home. Protein, good fats, whole fruits instead of juice, homemade cakes with almond flour. In the end, you would be surprised to see that these solutions do not necessarily cost more, concludes the dietitian. There are even recipes that combine business with pleasure, like this delicious banana cake, without sugar and without flour. However, it is important not to make a sudden change in children's eating habits but rather to gradually get them used to discovering less sweet flavors to suit their palate.